When worlds collide, the warning alarm screamed through the research vessel, Prometheus, as Dr. Marcus Chun fought desperately with the controls. The solar storm had appeared from nowhere, a massive eruption of electromagnetic energy that turned his ship's advanced navigation systems into useless scrap metal. Through the viewports, he watched the alien world below grow larger and larger, its purple-tinged atmosphere rushing up to meet him. Come on, come on, Marcus muttered, his fingers dancing across the emergency systems panel. The backup thrusters flickered to life for a moment before dying completely. He had perhaps 30 seconds before impact. His mind raced through his options, each one worse than the last. The emergency beacon was already transmitting, but help would be weeks away even if anyone received the signal. The ship hit the atmosphere like a stone thrown into water. Marcus felt the hull temperature rising dangerously as friction turned his vessel into a meteor. The gravity compensators failed, and he was pressed back into his seat with crushing force. Through the chaos, he glimpsed the planet's surface through breaks in the clouds. Endless white expanses broken by dark mountain ranges and strange, twisted forests that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. The final impact came with a sound like thunder. Marcus's world exploded into pain and darkness. When consciousness returned, it came slowly and reluctantly. Marcus found himself hanging upside down in his pilot's seat, blood dripping from a gash on his forehead. The cabin was filled with smoke and the acrid smell of burning electronics. Emergency lights flickered weakly, casting eerie shadows across the wreckage. His first clear thought was that he was alive. His second was that he might not remain so for long. Marcus activated the emergency, released for his safety harness, and dropped awkwardly to what had once been the ceiling. Every muscle in his body screamed in protest, and he was fairly certain he had cracked at least 2 ribs. But he was mobile, and that was what mattered. The ship's hull had been breached in multiple places, and frigid air was already pouring in. Through the largest gap, Marcus could see the alien landscape beyond. Snow. Endless. Windswept snow under a sky the color of bruised flesh. The temperature readings on his suit showed minus 40 degrees Celsius and dropping fast. He gathered what supplies he could from the wreckage. Emergency rations, water purification tablets, a basic medical kit, and most importantly, his thermal suit and portable heater. The ship's main computer was dead, but the backup data recorder was intact. If he survived, the information it contained would be invaluable to humanity's understanding of this world. Marcus sealed the breach as best he could and activated the portable heater, buying himself precious time. But he knew the power cells wouldn't last long in this cold. He had perhaps 6 hours before the temperatures inside the wreckage became as lethal as those outside. The emergency beacon was still functioning, its signal reaching uselessly into the void. Help, if it came at all, would arrive far too late. Marcus was on his own on an alien world, with minimal supplies and no knowledge of local conditions. The scientist in him was fascinated by the challenge. The human in him was terrified. He spent 2 hours cataloging his resources and studying the immediate area through the ship's external cameras. The landscape was desolate, but not entirely lifeless. Strange, crystalline formations jutted from the snow like frozen flowers, and occasionally he glimpsed movement in the distance. Whether it was weather phenomena or something more interesting, he couldn't tell. As the heater's power cells began to fail, Marcus made his decision. Staying with the ship meant certain death. Moving out into the unknown at least offered the possibility of survival, however remote. He sealed his thermal suit, checked his supplies one final time, and stepped out into the alien world. The cold hit him like a physical blow. Even through the advanced insulation of his suit, he could feel the brutal temperature trying to leach away his body heat. The wind was constant and merciless, driving ice crystals against his faceplate with enough force to leave scratches. Marcus oriented himself using the suit's basic compass and began walking toward what looked like a distant forest. The snow was deeper than it appeared, often reaching past his knees, and each step was a struggle. His breath fogged the inside of his helmet despite the suit's best efforts to regulate temperature and humidity dock after an hour of travel. His legs were burning with exhaustion and his core temperature was beginning to drop. The forest seemed no closer than when he had started. Marcus paused to rest, leaning against one of the strange crystal formations. Up close, he could see that it wasn't truly crystalline, but rather some kind of biological structure, like coral made of ice. It was beautiful and utterly alien. That was when he realized he was being watched. The figure stood, motionless about 50 meters away, so perfectly still that Marcus had initially mistaken it for another crystal formation. But now he could see the subtle differences. This was clearly a living being, tall and graceful, with pale skin that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. It wore what appeared to be armor made from the same ice coral material that dotted the landscape. Marcus's heart hammered in his chest. First contact. This was the moment that would define not just his own fate, but potentially the relationship between two species. He raised one hand slowly, palm outward, in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peaceful intent. The figure moved then, flowing across the snow with impossible grace. It covered the distance between them in seconds, moving so quickly that Marcus barely had time to register its approach before it was standing directly in front of him. This close, he could see that it was definitely humanoid, but clearly not human. The being was tall, perhaps 7 feet, with an athletic build that spoke of great strength. Its skin was pale blue-white, almost translucent, and its eyes were the color of Arctic ice. Most striking were the intricate patterns that covered its visible skin, looking like frost formed into deliberate designs. The being studied Marcus with those unsettling eyes. Its head tilted slightly to one side. When it spoke, its voice was like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, musical and haunting. Marcus's translation software was useless without a linguistic database. But he didn't need technology to recognize the questioning tone. "I'm human," Marcus said, knowing the words were meaningless but hoping his tone would convey peaceful intent. "My name is Marcus. I'm lost." The being's eyes narrowed and it stepped closer. Marcus forced himself to remain still, despite every instinct screaming at him to run. Those ice-colored eyes seemed to be looking through him, studying not just his physical form, but something deeper then. Without warning, the being reached out and touched his helmet. The contact was brief, just a moment, but Marcus felt something pass between them. Not quite thought, not quite emotion, but something that bridged the gap between their utterly different minds. Understanding flooded through him. This being was female, and her name was something like Kestra, though the true pronunciation was beyond human vocal cords. She was a warrior, a guardian of this territory, and she was trying to decide whether he represented a threat to her people. More importantly, she could sense that he was dying. His suit's heating system was failing faster than he had realized, and his core temperature was dropping to dangerous levels. He had, perhaps an hour before hypothermia claimed him. Kestra stepped back and seemed to come to a decision. She spoke again, her voice urgent now, and gestured for him to follow. When Marcus hesitated, she moved closer and gently but firmly took his arm. Her touch was surprisingly warm despite her ice-cold appearance. They traveled together across the snowy landscape, Kestra moving with easy confidence while Marcus struggled to keep pace. Several times he stumbled, and each time she was there to steady him, her grip strong and sure. The cold was beginning to affect his thinking, making everything seem distant and dreamlike. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, they reached what appeared to be a solid wall of ice. Kestra approached the wall and pressed her hand against a specific spot. To Marcus's amazement, a section of the ice simply dissolved, revealing a passage beyond. The interior was warm and filled with soft, bioluminescent light. Marcus realized he was looking at some kind of natural or semi-natural shelter, carved from ice but somehow maintaining a comfortable temperature. The walls were covered in the same frost-patterned designs he had seen on Kestra's skin, but here they seemed to pulse gently with their own inner light. Kestra guided him to what was clearly a resting area. furnished with what looked like furs, but felt warm to the touch. She helped him remove his helmet, and Marcus breathed deeply of air that was clean and somehow energizing. The exhaustion and cold that had been building in his system began to recede. Kestra knelt beside him and began examining his suit with obvious curiosity. Her fingers were long and elegant, and Marcus noticed that they ended in short, claw-like projections that looked both decorative and functional. When she found the suit's heating controls, she frowned and looked at him with what was clearly concern. "It's broken," Marcus said, pointing to the controls. "The power cells are dying. Without heat, He made a gesture across his throat, hoping she would understand. Kestra's frown deepened, and she stood abruptly. She moved to another part of the shelter and returned with what looked like a small crystal. When she pressed it against his suit's power pack, Marcus felt warmth begin to spread through the garment. Again, somehow she had managed to recharge or supplement his failing power system. Their eyes met across the small space, and Marcus saw something in her gaze that surprised him. Not just concern or curiosity, but something deeper. Something almost protective. It made no sense. They had met less than an hour ago, and they were of completely different species. Yet there was something in the way she looked at him that suggested their meeting was more than mere chance. Kestra spoke again, her voice softer now, almost gentle. The translation was unclear, but Marcus thought he caught something like safe and protect. She gestured to herself and then to him, and the meaning seemed clear enough. Whatever had brought them together, she had decided to keep him safe. As warmth returned to his body and the immediate threat of death receded, Marcus found himself studying his unexpected savior. Kestra moved with fluid grace, every motion economical and purposeful. She was clearly a being adapted to this harsh environment, as comfortable in the killing cold as Marcus was in a temperature-controlled laboratory. But there was something else about her, something that nagged at the edge of his consciousness. The way she had looked at him when they first met, as if she recognized something familiar. The immediate decision to help him despite the obvious differences between their species. The protective instinct that seemed to have awakened in her the moment she saw him. Marcus settled back into the warm furs, his scientific mind already working to understand what had happened. First contact with an alien species was miraculous enough, but this felt like something more. Something that would change not just his own life, but the relationship between their peoples. Outside the shelter, the alien wind howled across the frozen landscape. But inside, warmth and an unexpected sense of safety enveloped him. Kestra moved quietly around the space, preparing what looked like food and checking periodically to ensure his suit's systems were functioning properly. As exhaustion finally claimed him, Marcus's last conscious thought was wonder at the turn his life had taken. He had come to this world as a scientist seeking knowledge. Instead, he had found something far more precious and infinitely more complex. He had found a guardian who seemed willing to risk everything to keep him safe, for reasons neither of them yet understood. The questions would have to wait. For now, it was enough that he was alive, warm, and no longer alone in this beautiful, terrible alien world. Asterisk bonds beyond species. Marcus woke to the sound of voices speaking in melodic tones that his mind couldn't quite grasp. The bioluminescent walls of Kestra's shelter pulsed gently, and he realized that the light patterns seemed to respond to the emotional state of its inhabitants. Right now, they flickered with what felt like tension and uncertainty. Kestra was speaking with two other beings near the shelter's entrance. They were clearly of the same species, tall and graceful with the same ice-pale skin and intricate frost patterns, but their bearing was different. Where Kestra moved with fluid confidence, these newcomers held themselves with formal rigidity that spoke of authority and suspicion. The conversation grew more heated, and Marcus caught his name several times in the musical flow of their language. One of the newcomers, slightly taller than the others, with silver markings along his arms, gestured sharply toward Marcus. The meaning was clear enough even without translation. They were discussing what to do with the alien intruder. Kestra's response was immediate and fierce. She stepped between Marcus and the others, her posture protective and unyielding. The frost patterns on her skin seemed to pulse with inner fire, and Marcus realized that they weren't just decorative, but somehow reflected emotional state or perhaps even vital signs. The silver-marked being spoke again, his tone clearly authoritative. Whatever he was saying, it made Kestra's patterns flare brighter, and she responded with what sounded like a flat refusal. The tension in the shelter was becoming palpable, the bioluminescent walls now flickering between cool blue and angry red. Marcus struggled to sit up, drawing the attention of all three beings. The newcomers studied him with undisguised curiosity and wariness. But Kestra immediately moved to his side, her concern evident. "I think," Marcus said slowly, addressing all three but looking primarily at the silver-marked leader, "that we need to try to understand each other." He touched his chest. "Marcus? Human." Then he gestured to Kestra. "Friend." The leader's ice-colored eyes narrowed, and he spoke a single word that somehow conveyed volumes of skepticism. But the other newcomer, a female with golden patterns spiraling across her arms, tilted her head thoughtfully and spoke in more measured tones. Gesture responded to the female, and Marcus caught what sounded like explanations mixed with something that might have been pleading. The golden-marked female approached slowly, her movements careful and non-threatening. When she was close enough, she extended one hand toward Marcus, palm up. Understanding instinctively, Marcus reached out and briefly touched her palm with his own. The contact was electric, and suddenly his mind was flooded with images and sensations that weren't his own. He saw the Valtharian city in the distance, carved from living ice and crystal, filled with beings like Kestra moving through daily routines that were both alien and somehow familiar. He saw their history, stretches of time beyond human comprehension, and their gradual isolation as their world grew colder and their population dwindled. But most importantly, he saw himself through their eyes, not just as an alien intruder, but as something they had been waiting for without knowing it. The images showed ancient carvings and legends speaking of Skyborn, beings who would come when the Valtharians needed them most, beings who would bring new knowledge and help their dying civilization find a path to survival. The contact broke, leaving Marcus gasping and disoriented. The golden-marked female stepped back, her patterns now glowing with what looked like wonder. She spoke rapidly to the others, her voice filled with excitement and awe. The silver-marked leader's expression shifted from suspicion to something closer to shock. He looked between Marcus and Kestra, and his next words carried a tone of recognition that needed no translation. Kestra moved closer to Marcus, her hand finding his shoulder in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. When she spoke, her voice carried a note of certainty that hadn't been there before. Whatever she was saying, it silenced the others completely. The golden-marked female knelt beside Marcus, her movements reverent. She spoke directly to him, and though he couldn't understand the words, the meaning came through clearly. "Are you the one from the prophecies? Are you here to save us?" Marcus felt the weight of expectation settling on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. These people were looking to him for salvation, believing he was part of some ancient prophecy. The scientist in him wanted to explain that he was just a researcher who had crashed on their world by accident. But another part of him, a part that was growing stronger by the moment, recognized that perhaps there were no accidents in the universe. "I don't know if I'm who you think I am," he said carefully, "but I want to help if I can." The golden-marked female smiled, an expression that transformed her alien features into something almost human in its warmth. She spoke to Kestra, who nodded and began gathering supplies from around the shelter. The silver-marked leader approached Marcus with obvious reluctance. When he spoke, his tone was formal, but no longer hostile. Kestra translated her English, accented but clear. Somehow, during their brief contact, she had absorbed enough of his language to communicate. "Elder Thesis says you must prove yourself to the tribe," she explained. "If you are truly the Skyborn from the prophecies, you will know how to help us solve the crisis that threatens our people." "What crisis?" Marcus asked, though he was already beginning to suspect. Kestra's patterns dimmed with sadness. Our world is dying, she said simply. The cold grows stronger each cycle, and our numbers grow fewer. The ice coral that sustains. Our technology is failing, and our young are born weaker than their parents. We have perhaps 2 generations before we are extinct. Marcus felt his heart sink. These people were facing extinction, and they expected him to provide a miracle cure. But as he looked around the shelter, his scientific mind began to work. The bioluminescent walls, the ice coral technology, the way Kestra had recharged his suit's power cells, there were principles here that could be understood and perhaps improved upon. Show me, he said, rising to his feet with Kestra's assistance. Show me your technology, your city, your problems. I can't promise miracles, but I can promise that I'll use everything I know to try to help. The journey to the Valtharian city took most of the day, traveling across terrain that would have been impossible for Marcus to navigate alone. Kestra stayed close to his side throughout, her protective instincts evident in every gesture. More than once, she guided him away from hidden dangers that his human senses couldn't detect. The city itself was breathtaking, a crystalline metropolis that seemed to grow from the ice-covered mountains themselves. Spires of living coral ice stretched toward the purple sky, connected by bridges that pulsed with the same bioluminescent energy that had lit Kestra's shelter. Despite its beauty, Marcus could see signs of decay and abandonment. Entire sections of the city were dark, their organic systems failing. Elder Thizes led them to what was clearly a center of learning and technology, where other Valtharians were, working desperately to maintain failing systems. The ice coral that powered their civilization was indeed dying, its bioluminescent energy growing weaker with each passing day. Marcus studied the coral samples with growing fascination. The organisms were incredibly sophisticated, using quantum-level processes to convert ambient energy into usable power. But they were suffering from what appeared to be a cascade failure in their genetic structure, possibly caused by environmental changes or simple genetic drift over thousands of years. Your coral is essentially organic technology, Marcus explained to the gathering of Valtharian scientists and elders. It's failing because it's too isolated, too specialized. In human biology, we call this genetic bottlenecking. The golden marked female, whose name Marcus had learned was Advisor Ellen, translated his words for the others. The response was immediate and intense, with several conversations breaking out simultaneously. Can you fix it? Kestra asked, her voice tight with hope and fear. Marcus spent the next several hours studying the coral samples and the city's power distribution systems. What he found was both encouraging and daunting. The organisms could theoretically be stabilized, but it would require introducing new genetic material and completely redesigning their cultivation methods. I have an idea, he said finally, but it's going to require trust and cooperation between our species. As if summoned by his words, a new crisis presented itself. Warning signals began sounding throughout the city, and Valtharians rushed to defensive positions. Through the crystal walls, Marcus could see dark shapes moving across the frozen landscape toward the city. The Devourers, Elder Thizes said grimly. They sense our weakness and come to feed on our dying coral. Marcus watched as the attacking creatures reached the city's outer defenses. They were insectoid in appearance but massive, each one the size of a small building. Their mandibles glowed with energy as they began to tear into the city's coral structures, literally devouring the Valtharians' life support systems. The city's defenders fought bravely, but Marcus could see they were losing. Their weapons, powered by the failing coral, were becoming less effective with each shot. Soon the creatures would breach the inner defenses and reach the city's core. I need access to your main power distribution center, Marcus said urgently. It's too dangerous, Kestra protested. The Devourers will reach it soon. That's exactly why I need to get there, Marcus replied. I think I can save your coral, but I need to act now before it's too late. What followed was a desperate race through collapsing corridors as the Devourers tore apart sections of the city. Kestra fought beside Marcus, her weapon blazing with deadly precision. while Elder Lysis and advisor Ellen guided them through shortcuts known only to the city's guilders. They reached the power center just as the first devourer broke through the outer wall. The creature was even more terrifying up close, its compound eyes reflecting hungry intelligence as it spotted the coral matrix that powered the entire city. Marcus dove for the control systems, his fingers flying over interfaces that were alien, but somehow intuitive. The key was synchronization. The coral organisms needed to be linked, not just to each other, but to a broader network that could provide genetic diversity and stability. Kestra, he called over the sound of battle. I need your help. Touch the main coral node and open your mind to it. What are you doing? She demanded, even as she moved to comply. Creating a bridge, Marcus replied, placing his own hands on a secondary node. The coral needs genetic information from both our species to stabilize. Human adaptability combined with Baltharian specialization. The moment their combined consciousness touched the coral network, Marcus felt his awareness expand beyond anything he had ever experienced. He was connected not just to Kestra, but to every coral organism in the city, feeling their struggles and their potential for growth. Through Kestra, he touched the collective memory of her people, understanding their history and their dreams for the future. But more than that, he felt the connection between himself and Kestra crystallize into something permanent and profound. The protective instinct she had felt from their first meeting was revealed as something deeper, a recognition of compatibility that transcended species barriers. They were bonded now in ways that neither of their peoples had words to describe. The coral responded to their combined input with an explosion of renewed energy. Throughout the city, failing systems came back online with increased power and efficiency. The weapons of the defenders blazed with new intensity, driving back the devourers with overwhelming force. As the last of the attacking creatures fled into the frozen wilderness, Marcus and Kestra remained connected to the coral network, their consciousness intertwined. Through their bond, the coral had gained not just genetic stability, but evolutionary potential. It would continue to grow and adapt, powered by the combined strengths of both species. Is it over? Kestra asked, her voice soft with wonder. Marcus looked around the power center, now blazing with healthy bioluminescent energy. Through the crystal walls, he could see the city coming back to life, its dark sections lighting up one by one as the restored coral network spread throughout the structure. No, he said, smiling as he felt their permanent bond pulse with shared emotion. It's just beginning. Elder Lysis approached them, his formal bearing replaced by something approaching reverence. The prophecy spoke truly, he said in his musical language, the words somehow clear to Marcus through his connection with Kestra. The Skyborn has come to save us, and more than that, to join us. In the days that followed, as Marcus worked with Baltharian scientists to establish permanent colonies of hybrid coral and plan for expanded cooperation between their species, he often thought about the chain of events that had brought him to this moment. A chance solar storm, a desperate crash landing, and a meeting with a guardian who had recognized something in him that he hadn't even known existed. The rescue ships from Earth would arrive, eventually, but Marcus knew he wouldn't be leaving with them. His future was here, bonded to Kestra and committed to helping both their peoples build something new together. The universe, it seemed, had plans that were far grander than any individual could imagine. As he watched the sun rise over the crystal city, painting the ice coral spires in shades of gold and silver, Marcus felt complete in a way he had never experienced before. He had come to this world as a lost scientist. He was staying as something far more important, a bridge between worlds, a guardian's bonded partner, and a symbol of hope for two species learning to become one. Asterisk.